Welcome everybody to your Countifs adventure. My name is Alan Murray, and through the course of this presentation I will make you fall in love with the Countifs function of Excel. One of the most flexible and incredibly useful functions there is. I'm very proud that you have spent your time with me in this presentation at the Virtually Global Excel Summit 2021. So a few quick words about me for anybody who I may be meeting for the first time. So I live in the UK, I'm a father of two, and I'm an Excel and Power BI trainer, and I've been doing that for many years. I also run a blog and a YouTube channel named Computer Gaga, and that's probably what I'm most well known for around the Excel community. I've written a book named Advanced Excel Success, was awarded MVP last year. I organise a meetup in London, which happens both in person for anybody who lives around the area. You can check that out, and also virtually for the international audience. And feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. So keeping that short and sweet, but a brief intro. Moving on to what this presentation is about, which is Countifs. Why is it so great? Well, it's typically used to produce some stats for reporting, just like you may have used the SUMIFS function before. You know, how many phone calls have we received this week so far? You know, how many transactions were over £2,500? Some good results for our Excel reports. But it can do so much more. It's brilliant for comparing lists in any manner that you may wish to do so. Do you want to list the names of people who occur in both lists? Do you want to count how many people occur in one list but not another list? There are many interpretations of compare lists, and Countifs can pretty much help you with all of them. It's also great at ranking values. Now that's something that's got easier in modern Excel with some of the array power and the functions we have. But Countifs, being that it's been around since 2007, the Countifs version is in every version, give or take, and offers us a way of ranking values, whether we need to apply conditions or we want to apply a unique ranking. It's so helpful with that. It's also great at working with duplicates, which is probably not too much of a surprise with a function that can count. And it's also brilliant when combined with other functions, just like pretty much any function is. It does a great job on its own. You combine it with something else, and all of a sudden you have a very different beast. And that certainly applies to Countifs. Now, unfortunately, we don't have time to go through my whole repertoire of Countifs. I have many examples of it in action on my YouTube channel, and it has come to my aid so many times over the years, helping solve kind of tasks for people in my training and whatnot. But this should be a very fun session, and I'm confident I can make you fall in love with Countifs in the under 50 minutes that we have together. And I am wasting some of those right now. So I've provided the file for you to follow along. Grab that file, practice as much as you want, and let's get stuck in. So we are going to begin with some classic Countifs examples, and we will keep this quite brief so we can get to the more interesting use cases as this presentation develops. But to begin with here, I have a table named TBL sales, and we want to create two resulting values here. The first of all being how many orders, how many transactions have we had between the two dates in cells E3 and F3. So if I click in cell E6, this is where the result will be, and obviously it equals Countifs. Now, in this example, we have more than one condition, so we definitely need Countifs, because the singular version Countif can only handle one condition, and obviously with two dates we have two conditions. Countif is still around and is helpful if you only have one condition, but to be honest, I never use it because Countifs can do that and more. So the Countif function predates Excel 2007 and is only left around for compatibility reasons nowadays, although people do still use it. So it's Countifs, and criteria range 1 is going to be our date column. So if I type TBL sales, open square bracket date, I could have selected the cells or selected the column, but when working with tables it's so fast and easy to type, it's probably quicker doing that than even clicking with your mouse. Comma, the criteria. Now we need to combine a cell value here with some logic. So open double quotes, greater than or equals, closing double quotes, ampersand the cell value. Functions such as Countifs and SUMIFs and AverageIfs, when you're doing a combination of some written text and a cell value, we will need to concatenate these into one. Comma, okay, criteria range 2, let's rattle through the same thing. TBL sales, open square bracket date, close square bracket. Comma, the criteria is if it is less than or equal to ampersand the value cell F3, we are good to go, close bracket and enter on that. 9 for the date range of the 1st of March to the 31st of August, which we can see is this range here. Okay, so that is one example. Let's do our second result. So it's Countifs again. Criteria range, TBL sales date. And the criteria just like before, so I'm shooting through this at a reasonable speed here, is whether it is greater than or equal to the date entered in cell E9. Comma, criteria range 2 is TBL sales. I've just used the wrong table there. Open square bracket. This time it's the region, because I want to know if the region is the value of the south. Now, one of the reasons I've picked this second example is you can see that when we're testing a numeric value, such as a date, to ask if it's greater than or less than, see how I've combined the reference to the cell and the logical operators, whereas with this text value I can just refer to the cell. So for anyone who may be very new to the Countifs function, this gives a good example of the different ways of writing criteria. It is very different to, say, writing criteria in an if function, for example. However, for most of you, I'm assuming there is some familiarity and you're in this presentation to see the crazy stuff that will make us fall in love with Countifs. So I'm going to close off this bracket and run this, and that is just a nice solid classic Countifs examples to get the ball rolling here, producing some results probably for your Excel reports and dashboards. How many values meet multiple conditions? Comparing lists is a very common task for Excel users. It's something that comes up many times in my training, and some of you may be familiar with merge queries, which are a great way of handling this task in Excel. But we are going to do it with a formula, and I am going to take advantage of modern Excel and the built-in array engine here, and also the filter function, because our task is that we would like to return the names that occur in both of these lists, in columns B and D, and then also do a formula to show the names that only occur in the first list. So let's get going. And what I'd like to do to begin with in cell F3 is just type the Countifs function on its own, so we can see the job it does before we wrap a filter around it. So it's Countifs. I do only have one condition here, but I've already spoken about the fact that I use Countifs over Countif always. So criteria range 1 is that second list, and it's just a range here. This is not a table. Comma, and then the criteria is the first list. So I want to know how many times people from the first list appear in that second list. And when I close bracket and press enter, I just get this array of 0 and 1s. So obviously 1 if they do occur there. And immediately we can see that it's Susan, Michael and Javier. And these lists are small. You probably could have figured that out on your own. But imagine how awesome this is with large lists. Now obviously we don't want a bunch of 0 and 1s, we want their name. So all we have to do now is go back to that first formula and we will wrap a filter function around it to say return the names from list 1, comma, if the include argument is our Countifs function. So I'm going to come to the end here, close off that bracket and press enter, and there are the names of Susan, Michael and Javier. Easy peasy in modern Excel. Now this is a spill array, so it would be at its best if our source data was in a table to have a fully dynamic solution, but I'm just basing it on a range here as we are just kind of learning the techniques. Coming to our second one though. Now this really is just a small variation on our first one. If I just copy the formula from our first example there, and I'll come into our list 1 and paste that in, and the only difference to convert this into a list 1 only would be around the Countifs function, I could wrap a not function to reverse those answers. So now pressing enter actually gives me the names that occur in the first list and not the second one, i.e. Joseph, Garth and Mandy in this case. So a couple of quick examples there of comparing lists and how easy it is with that Countifs function and a little help from its friend filter. And we will see filter again later in this presentation. A function that has always been missing for the Excel user is a distinct count. We have an array of count functions. There is a count a count blank, a count, and obviously a Countifs, but there is no distinct count. Now in modern Excel, such as Excel 365 and Excel Online, this is quite easy to do because we can combine a combination of count A and unique. So for example, if I want to find a distinct list of names here, if I want to know how many names occur, excluding duplications, I simply do a count A function and wrap a unique function inside it that refers to that array. The unique function by default produces a distinct list, so counting the results there, it's very easy to get number 6. However, that is if you have modern Excel with unique. What do you do if you don't? Well, I think we know the answer to that. We use Countifs. That's what we do. And with the Countifs function, we provide it with the range of names as the criteria range, and also the range of names for the criteria. Now, on its own, this Countifs function is going to produce these results. Now, don't be sidetracked by the spill array here. The approach I'm taking will work in all versions of Excel. Now, yes, it is 365 doing the spill array, but this is not the end result. That is not a requirement. However, it does nicely show the inner workings of this function, and those names that occur more than once have a number 2. So all I can now do in there is stick a number 1 divided by those results, and what that will produce is 0.5, where a name occurs more than once. And now that I've done that, I can simply just sum the answers, because the answer to that is 6, which is the same answer that was returned by the count A unique combination. Now, if I do a normal sum, I'd have to wrap that into a Control-Shift-Enter array in older versions. So a simpler way, if you are using a non-365 version of Excel, is to wrap this in some product, which has the ability to handle arrays within itself. So I can just wrap a sum product around that, and there's your number 6. A distinct count function for all versions of Excel, thanks to Countifs, and a little help from sum product. The Countifs function is ideal for working with duplicates in Excel and provides a lot of flexibility around doing that. Excel's got a few features to work with duplicates. We have the remove duplicates feature, which does what it says on the tin. Brilliant if you want to remove duplicates, but also very fixed in the process it does. We also have conditional formatting and a feature in there, but once again it's constrained by its options, and it will highlight every version of a name that is duplicated. So let's imagine that we needed something a little bit more specific, and I would like to format the names that occur more than twice. So it is a duplicate, but I'm happy with it occurring twice, but more than twice, I want to flag those ones. Now this means we need to get more involved, and Countifs is our friend. So in column D here, if I write the formula in a cell, and then we can ultimately put it into a conditional formatting rule. It's always easier to write formulas in your cells first, because once you're within a window of Excel, it can be very small and very awkward and very unhelpful at writing formulas. So equals Countifs, and I think we've probably got the feel for this kind of example. So if I select the range of names, comma, select the range of names, this will simply tell me how many times they occur. I can close bracket and enter on this. I'm using 365, I have that spill array, and we can see that it's only Anna Trujillo who occurs more than twice. Now once again, although I have this spill array working, it's not a requirement for this task. If I go back to my formula, I could just change that criteria to only Anna, and then I'll make the first range absolute, and I'll run that formula, and then I'll just fill that down, and I've got the same results. Now the idea here is that we want to bring this into conditional formatting, and conditional formatting is going to need a result of true in order to format it. So coming back to our formula, let's turn this into a logical expression. Let's ask if that is greater than 2 and press enter. And now we have trues next to Anna, falses around the other names. Finally, because we're putting this into a formatting rule, and because I would like to format both columns of the name, the ID and the name, I also need to make that column absolute. So I'll put my dollar before that column C of the criteria, and whilst I'm in this formula, I shall select it and copy, Control C, and then press escape to get out of the editing of that formula. Select the ID and name columns of this range. conditional formatting on home and new rule. Use a formula to determine the cells to format, and Control V to paste our formula into the box provided. Specify the format. Well, this is a big decision. I think I'll have a nice blue. And why not turn that font bold? OK to each of these windows, and there we have it. We no longer need our formula in column D. That was just to, build our way up to copying the formula into the formatting rule. One, because it's easier to write on the grid, and two, because it also helped us in writing it. We would have spotted an error and we could have built it bit by bit, seeing the process. Just to confirm this is working, if Carlos Gonzalez was to occur again further down, there it is flagged as occurring more than twice. So that's just one example, but because Countifs is a function, we can apply it into a formula. We have much more flexibility about when you say duplicate, what do you mean? Is it that it's got to occur more than once? Is there any other criteria involved in that? And we can go beyond the ceiling that some of the built-in features of Excel will cap us off at. We are now going to use the Countifs function to create a conditional rank formula. Now, Excel has rank functions, but we have the condition that we would like to use of the location. Now, this is a table named TBL rank if, and we would like to rank the values for each of these locations: Madrid, Berlin, Chicago, and Sydney. So for example, that first Madrid value is actually the third highest value. So it should be ranked number 3. So let's get going. Countifs function. And the range is going to be TBL rank if. And the column of location. And the criteria for this first condition is just that first location. So first of all, it has to be, in this case, Madrid. But as this formula goes row by row, Berlin, Chicago, and so on. Comma, we have a second condition. Now this second condition is testing the values column. And in this column, we want to know how many values are larger than the value of this row. So if I put a comma to come into this criteria, we will need our greater than sign, and I'll wrap that in the quotes, and then the ampersand to bring in the current row's value. And we saw something similar to this in our very first example, combining text with a cell value to form a criteria. So we want to know how many values are larger than this one from Madrid. And there are 2. There is the one of 465 and the one of 439. So this current row is the third highest value for Madrid, but there are 2 higher. So once we've figured that out, and I'll close off this Countifs that does that, we're going to +1. So there are 2 higher, +1, you're ranked number 3. And we'll keep this logic going for each of the other rows. So if I press enter, the table will fill that down, because that's what tables do, and tables are incredible. And there we have our third rank. And looking down, you can see 465 Madrid number 1, 439 Madrid number 2, and so on. This is working for all of them. Pretty awesome. A rank by criteria. Once we have this rank, we can start using that in other formulas. creating some kind of league table or some kind of discount created by rank, or whatever the purpose of this spreadsheet may be. But the hard work has been done here by Countifs. Now, although I only used one condition here really, which is the location, bear in mind that we could have even pushed this further and had a second or a third condition, because Countifs will handle as many conditions as you need it to. Once you've got this logic under wraps, you are golden. Continuing our talk of ranking, let's look at how the Countifs function can help us rank values uniquely. Now, this is very important so that we can uniquely identify a row of values for other calculations or when we're returning columns in a lookup. This could be part of a league table, for which I've done a lot of work in that area of Excel. So we've got a small range here, and you can probably see that we've got two scores that are the same, which is Joseph and Garth, and they're 84. So in cell C2, if I was going to use a rank function and I wanted to rank these values, so the number is the score, comma, the reference is all of the scores, and I'll make that absolute with my F4 key. And I won't worry about the order, because by default this will use a descending order, which is exactly what I want. The higher the value, the lower the rank. So close the bracket and enter, and if I copy this down, we have our rankings. But we have two rankings of 3, which is what we kind of suspected with our two scores of 84. So it is ranking them, but I don't want these tied ranks. I need to uniquely identify them for if I'm performing things such as index match or any kind of calculation really based on that rank. So coming back to that first formula, we are going to add on the end of that our Countifs function. And in this Countifs function, we're going to create a rolling range. I'm going to select cell B2 and put in my colon for a range, and then just make sure the first part of that range is fixed. So if I click amongst it and F4, so I've got a fixed starting point of the range, but then a relative ending point. So as I copy this formula down, it will be B2 to B3, B2 to B4, and so on. Now that's the criteria range. If I put a comma, the criteria is the score itself. So I want to count how many times up to this point in the range has that score occurred. So currently with this formula, it would have only occurred once, but by the time it gets to the second 84, that will be the second occurrence. And that will be added on to the current rank of 3. So 3 plus 2 will be 5. So after this Countifs, I want to subtract 1. So I want to count how many times has this score occurred up to this point, and then subtract 1 from that value. So when I press enter and copy this down, there are our ranks. And the value for Garth is successfully increased to 4, so I now have a unique ranking. Now I should just add on at this point that we've only got one column for the score. You may have other columns of data and other ways of distinguishing that rank. So if their score is the same, can we use another column to rank them differently? For example, in many sports, a league table is ranked on points, but if the points are the same, it would work to a next criteria, so much how many points or how many goals they have scored, or the point difference, or the performance in a game against that team that they're equal ranking with. And I've done a lot of work in the area and I have courses on how to do that. But if there is no other way of distinguishing them, such as in this example, we can use Countifs to uniquely rank them. Let's now see the Countifs function working to create the number of occurrences within certain ranges or bins. Now, Excel does have a frequency function to do this, which is improved now that we have the array engine of Excel, but especially in older versions, Countifs is the go-to tool. So I have these scores in a table named TBL scores, and I have these bins set up in these text values. So we're going to use Countifs, but we're going to use this opportunity to play around with some formulas that manipulate text as well. So in cell E3 here, it's the Countifs function, and we want to count how many of those scores occur from 50 to 64. So the criteria range, well, that is TBL scores and then the column of score. Comma, the criteria, well, that is just the first two digits or the first two characters from that bin. So I'm going to use the left function on that text value, comma, 2 characters. Nice and easy. Subtract those 2 characters. Close off that bracket. But I need to know if the score is greater than or equal to those characters, that value that is extracted by left. So just before left, in the quotes, greater than or equals to, and the ampersand to concatenate that value to those logical operators. Something we've seen within this presentation already, but this time with left added in there. Okay, so that's one condition. Moving to the end and put in a comma so we can go on to a second criteria range. Once again, we're testing TBL scores and the score column. This time, less than or equal to are the operators, ampersand, and we're going for the right function because now we want the last 2 characters. So that text cell, comma 2, close bracket for right, close bracket for Countifs, pressing enter tells us there is 1, which is correct. It is that Francesca down there with 62. Now if we select that cell and fill it down, we have the 4 for 65 to 79, the 1 for 80 to 89, and then we have a problem because there's clearly people such as Ben and such as Joseph who have exceeded that 89. They've got that 90 plus. Now one way we can deal with that last one is just to come into that Countifs and just remove that second condition because we don't need it in that last example. This is the end. Anything above 90, or sorry, everything that's 90 or above meets that last bin, and that will give us 4, and that is all correct. However, maybe we're thinking, how would we include that? Instead of just typing 3 instead of 2, how can we make this more dynamic? Well, let me just undo that last step with Control Z, and let me come back to the first one, even though the first one's fine, and we'll create a consistent formula for each of them. So in the formula, instead of the number 2 for the right function, I will do the len function to count how many values, or sorry, how many characters there are in that text value, and subtract the position of the hyphen or the dash, because we can see there that 64 is 2 characters. Now there are 5 characters in total, 5 characters length, position of the hyphen is 3, 5 take away 3 is 2. So by finding the length and subtracting the hyphen position, we are left with the number of characters on the end of that range. So find function, I'm looking for the hyphen, comma, where are you looking? That bin there, that text value. And I don't need to specify a starting number, so I'll close that off. And that should be that. Pressing enter, no change on the first one, fill it down. Yes, that last one changes to 4. So we had multiple ways of dealing with that last one, but taking the opportunity to get a little bit more fancy with our formulas and also to create something that's consistent throughout the range, rather than having these inconsistent formulas to cater for different scenarios and trying to avoid any manual labour as much as we can. Once again, it's Countifs to the rescue though, performing a very typical spreadsheet task. Now we have those counts, we could easily select that range and just create ourselves a column chart, and with a little bit of formatting we convert that into a histogram by reducing the gap between the columns, etc. But we won't go into that here because that's not what the purpose of this presentation is. I will leave that column chart not looking particularly nice, but showing that we have achieved our objective. The rest of it would just be adding the gloss on top of the hard work we have done. The functionality is there because of Countifs. Let's now see how the Countifs function can help us to build a really cool shrinking drop-down list. So I have a name of workers in column A. Now that is actually a table named TBL workers. And I also have another table named TBL tasks with a list of 7 tasks, 1 for each worker, and I would like to assign these workers to different tasks each week. And each time I assign a worker to a task, I want them removed from the drop down so that they don't appear when I'm assigning to another task. And it doesn't confuse me. I'm easily confused. Now in column F, I've got a kind of prep range going on here. And in cell F2, you know the drill, Countifs. We are using Countifs to count the range from this table. So I'll just select it here, but you saw me typing it earlier in the presentation. TBL tasks, this week column, comma, the criteria is going to be the range of names. Can we count how many times those names occur in the list of tasks? Close bracket, enter, and currently none of them occur. But let's bring Pedro in and say, right, Pedro, you are going to do task 3. And as soon as that's done, notice the number 1 occur next to Pedro's name. And I'm referring to the name in the TBL workers table. So it's been flagged that he has already been assigned a task. So Countifs is doing the job of knowing whether they've been assigned or not. I now need to just take this further into a position where I can create a drop-down list. So next up, coming back to that formula, I'm going to turn this into a logical expression and ask if it is equal to 0, equals 0 on the end of what I have. So pressing enter produces a bunch of trues and falses. False for Pedro, true for everybody else. And now I've got this. This would work as criteria in a function like filter. I love the filter function too. So filter around this to filter out the names of the workers, TBL workers' names, comma, what is the criteria? Well, we've written that already. That is Countifs. I'll click on the end here, comma, and what do you do if it's empty? I'll just provide an empty string, I think. Close off filter. So when I press enter, we get a list of names who have currently not been assigned. So notice Sven there the penultimate name. If I use Sven in a task, he is removed from the list. So that is working. That prep range, which doesn't have to be on this sheet, it would typically be on a hidden sheet. Nobody wants to see this here, but for the purposes of learning, we can see every little component and whether it works and how it works. The finishing task though here is that we select the range where we would like the drop-down list. We go to data and data validation to create said list. We choose list, and in the source we put equals the spill array. So I select the first name, F2 is the range of that first name, and then hash to access the spill array. Click OK, that is done. We have drop downs. So if I use the drop down and select Patricio, and then I go to task 6 and into the drop down, there is no Patricio. I choose Elizabeth Brown, go to another task, Elizabeth Brown is gone. So I've created this shrinking drop down. Pretty awesome. I have some error checking going on next to the names. I could select these and just ask that to be ignored. I'm sure many of you are familiar with those lovely green triangles, which can be very helpful. And in scenarios like that, I'm just making my example look like it's not working initially. They can be hidden. But shrinking drop-down list, how cool is that? And part of the preparation, a major cog in our preparation was Countifs. That is my final example in this presentation. So I do hope that you found this very useful, and I do hope that you have fallen in love with Countifs if you were not already in love. It is definitely, in my opinion, one of the most useful functions in Excel. Sure, they've all got a use and they can't be as flexible as Countifs. It is no discredit to functions such as abs and int. They have much more niche jobs to do. But when it comes to just a kind of Swiss Army knife approach to performing tasks in Excel, Countifs can do so much, and that makes it so useful, and is why I love it. I'm around for any questions, so feel free, and you are more than welcome to connect with me on LinkedIn or via my YouTube channel. Use Computer Gaga to find me. I'm easily found. Thank you for your time, and thank you to Liam and Tim and everyone at Some Product for inviting me to participate in this event this year.